Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We've been talking about relationships in the past few episodes, and we're going to continue on the short series of relationships, talking about romantic relationships and how you show up to them as a person. Today, we want to talk a little bit about healthy relationships. Antonia and I were thinking in terms of how would we were going to talk about how do you define a healthy relationship, and we realized that we have a little bit different definitions maybe of what we look toward is healthy relationships. And we were going to try to sync up our ideas on it and some of the things that we thought about. And we thought, it would actually be an interesting idea. Each of us separately make a list of maybe the top 5 markers that we would look toward for a healthy romantic relationship, whether it's our relationship or observing a relationship from the outside. We'll write those down, and then we'll each go one at a time down our list, back and forth, down through all 5 of them, and then talk about them as we go through it. Because this is a very subjective list. It's something you can't, there's no objective criteria for what's a healthy relationship. This is subjective to you. And I think the inspiration in this, or what we hope to inspire you to do as you're listening, is to create your own list of what you look for as a markers of healthy relationships, whether you're looking to your parents, other couples, or even in your own relationship that you have a part of.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if we define healthy relationship differently. We just see different markers stand out to us. But I think you clarified that very well. So we actually haven't talked to each other about our lists. Like, we went separately and wrote down 5 markers of a healthy relationship, meaning like if we're on the outside and we're looking from the outside into another couple's relationship, these are kind of the things that are markers to us that they've probably got some stuff dialed in, and we don't know what each other's lists say. So we might have actually written down the same things, or we might have completely different markers. We actually don't know because we didn't compare notes. But do you want to start? Like, we're going to give each other's top 5.
I'll start.
Do you want to do all 5 of yours, or do you want to do one of yours and then one of mine, and then
let's do one and one.
One and one?
One of mine, one of yours.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
All right, so as I'm looking at relationships, my own relationship or relationships outside of myself, as I look to other couples, I think one of the first things on my list is the passion, romance, and desire of the parties involved. And I look to see, are the people passionate toward each other? Are they feeling romantic? Are they desiring each other's company? Are they desiring each other? And I always am baffled when couples are in a relationship and that's missing. When that piece is missing, I'm always very confused. Like, there was a show many years ago, back in the 1990s, called Married with Children. And the couple in that show hated each other. They were at odds constantly and always fighting and in conflict. There was no passion, no romance, no desire for each other. They almost were annoyed to the degree. And I always used to, as a kid, I used to think, why are they even married? Why do they care? Why are they still here? Why are they going through all this if they don't even like each other? There's no passion involved. And I think that this is something that is very subjective to me that I might overvalue. Some people would look at a relationship and go, well, that's not needed for a relationship. Our relationship works because it's a constructed external structure that we fit together as people, and we're friends, and we flow in and out of being kind of friends and connected, but we're not really passionate with each other. We don't have a lot of that desire or underpinnings of romance and passion. But for me, that is definitely a marker of a healthy relationship.
Yeah. I don't have it as a marker of mine. It's not my list. And I think it's because I can see healthy relationships not necessarily having that piece. It's not what I would want, right? Like, I love a passionate relationship, but I could understand how different people, that might not be as important to them. But my number one thing that I wrote down is that the couple speaks highly, or a person speaks highly of their mate, but they don't brag about them. So when I hear couples talking about their spouse or their lover, and they always have positive, good things to say, but they're not objectifying their spouse as like a reason why they won. You know, like when do you know the difference I'm talking
unpack
about?
this more. Give me like maybe 2 examples from your, like how do you see that playing out?
So I think when I consider somebody bragging about their spouse, I feel like they're using their spouse's accomplishments as like they're vicariously saying that, look at how accomplished I am because my spouse is so accomplished. And it makes it more about them, like their spouse is a trophy or something that they won. And that must be their value and worth as an individual is then, quantitatively determined based on how awesome their mate is. And so that's like when I think of bragging, I think of actually the person puffing themselves up. And when I hear spouses talk about each other and they always have some sort of complaint, and there's always like, oh, you know that, you know him, or you know her, or whatever. Like there's kind of an eye-rolling thing going on when they're talking about their spouse. But if it's an incidental conversation and they always have something nice to say because they're almost kind of protective of their spouse's image. Like they want their spouse to have a positive impact in the world, and they want other people to think highly of their spouse. So whenever they talk about them, they always talk about them in a positive, like highly positive way, but they're not using their spouse's accomplishments to ride the coattails of them. And there's a distinction there, but I always appreciate it when they speak highly. Now, of course, if you're talking with an intimate and you're talking about your situation and maybe you have some challenge with your mate or your lover and you're speaking openly about it because that's the arrangement you have with your lover, that they wouldn't feel betrayed by that, and you're talking it through and you're trying to solve a challenge, you're not always going to, it's not always going to be rainbows and bunnies. And in casual conversation, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to bring that up all the time, right? And expose your relationship's dirty laundry. So it's that sweet spot. It's the sweet spot of being honest about your mate, speaking highly of them, but not bragging about them.
So number 2 on my list, as far as when I'm looking at relationships, if I'm kind of determining, is that a healthy relationship or not? Like that's, again, just the question in my mind, very subjective, but number 2 on my list is, are the people in the relationship encouraging each other to grow as people, whether it's together or separate? Is there an encouragement of growth happening in that relationship? And including when it's tough to allow your mate or the person you're in a relationship to grow. Like, is there a possibility for that growth to happen? And when I see couples that, even if, like, there's friends of ours that we hung out with recently, and the female in the relationship, there's some growth that needs to happen on the male side, and it would be very easy for this woman to be like, I'm not going to give space to that because it's threatening maybe to me in certain ways. This person needs to get their needs met. She, to her credit, is like, I'm invested in the person growing that I'm with, and I will allow them to express themselves and grow in these ways. And it might be tough for me, but it's something that's important for us. So I'm going to go ahead and allow that, like, encourage that to happen, not allow it to happen, but encourage that to happen. So, like, to me, that's a big marker of people who are in love, that they're probably in a healthy space. Is that one of yours on your list at all?
I don't have that on my list.
This is good. We got differences. I love the fact that we're not matching up on these.
I would agree with that completely, though. I would also agree that it's tough sometimes to give your partner space to grow because they might be growing in ways that are very threatening to you. And it's hard to see that from the outside, though. I think we interpreted this a little differently, almost like these would be the markers of a healthy relationship to you. And I'm more looking at what kinds of things would betray that, like if I saw it from the outside. So I think we interpreted it slightly different, but that's cool too, because we're gonna get more definitions.
Well, I see it from the outside as the person being real grabby, or you can't go, that career is threatening to me, so you can't go do that. But it's like, no, that career is probably going to further you as a person. So I want to actually encourage you to follow that path, even though you're going to be away from the family maybe a little bit more than I'd want you to in the next couple of months as you're getting started, because you have to go and put some more time in over here. Those like kind of things, depending on what it is. So these are more of the external markers I'm looking for.
Yeah, no, I see that. My number 2 was that neither sees either one as the problem. So in a relationship, it's very easy for each person to pit all the problems on the other person, or for them to both unconsciously determine that one of them is the problem, and that both people keep that story going. Like, it's either her or him, they're the problem. And I think in a healthy relationship, nobody gets that designation of being, quote unquote, the problem. If there's challenges in the relationship, there's no single person who gets the brunt of all of the blame. That each person owns when they are temporarily a problem. Because I think in all relationships, we become a problem, even if it's just for 3 to 5 minutes, where we're demanding our own way. And then we're like, okay, I don't know what I was doing back there, but for that 5 minutes, I was the problem. And it goes back and forth. And sometimes one person is struggling more than the other person at a certain time period. But if the relationship is so mismatched that one person is always quote unquote the problem, then why are those people together? Shouldn't they be going their own way? Maybe the dynamic isn't working out. Maybe the original determination of that match wasn't an accurate assessment. Kind of like you're talking about, like if they're constantly battling, why are you guys together? And in my mind, if one person is the problem, then maybe the relationship is complete. And it's not so much that that person's the problem, but that the relationship itself isn't compatible. But I've noticed in healthy relationships, there's no one person who's like everybody's rolling their eyes about and I'm like, oh, I don't know how you put up with it. There is none of that like dialogue going on. And if you're the person who sees your spouse as the problem, either you're in the wrong relationship or you're dumping a bunch of stuff onto them. And if you're the problem in the relationship and everything gets dumped on you, again, why is your spouse still with you? Shouldn't they be moving on? Or like maybe you're allowing yourself to take the brunt of something that is actually a shared experience.
I think that's the insidious part, is if you are in a dynamic where you're taking it upon yourself going, I am the problem here, that could be even more detrimental than projecting onto somebody else, because you're absorbing a bunch of stuff that probably isn't yours. You're taking the hit on something that may not be fair for you to take the hit on to yourself about. And that can be I was in a relationship that way where I saw myself as 100% the issue. And I thought that was what I had to change all of that. And I've done a lot of work to see it in a very different way now. But I think that could be very, very insidious, that piece.
Yeah, and it just keeps you in the drama triangle. It's a villain, victim, hero mentality. Somebody's the villain and the other person's the victim or the hero. And it just keeps you trapped in a drama triangle. Now, what's the nice thing about being trapped in a drama triangle is that nobody really does anything to change. Like everybody gets the hit of being able to complain or being a martyr, or like everybody's getting some sort of secondary payoff in that experience. And that's not the marker of a healthy relationship. If you want a healthy relationship, you got to get out of the drama triangle.
Yeah, well, at least according to your list.
According to number 2 on my top 5.
Again, these are subjective. These are our opinions, our viewpoints. And as you're listening to this, you might be thinking in terms of your list, your top 5, your top 10 of things you look for in a healthy relationship. Number 3 on my list is each person gets to still show up as their fully expressed self, their fully authentic self. So I think that we do make accommodations for each other. When we enter into a relationship, you can't do things the way you used to do them. You have to alter a little bit because now you have to take into account more territory than just yourself. But one of the things is you get to show up. I think a healthy relationship allows a person to show up who they truly are. And if you're in the right relationship, again, according to my opinion, how I see it, if you're in the right relationship, that person's going to be excited every time you show up more and more your authentic self. And in fact, you should be excited for them to show up more and more their authentic self. And you get to do that together. How powerful and amazing is that? And that leads back to, the other point about passion, desire, and romance. It's like if you can show up as your authentic self, that just increases the passion you can have between each other if you can make space for that together.
Number 3 on my list is, and maybe this harkens to what you were saying as your number 1. I don't know if I necessarily define it as passion, but I wrote down that they regularly look for reminders of being in each other's physical presence. And what I mean by that is, let's say that they're somewhere else outside the home and maybe they're at a party. Every once in a while, there's just something inside them that makes them want to go look for their mate. Like their eyes sweep the crowd to go make sure their mate is still around. And if they're physically in each other's proximity, they just their hands find each other, or there's like a little squeeze, or you know what I mean? Like there's a need to regularly check in to remind yourself that person is around. And there's just like a joy of being reminded that person is with you physically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Well, I find that even if I can't see you, like if we're completely separate from 2 different locations, if I'm thinking about you, I'll be like, oh, and I'll just like fire off a little smiley face or heart, say love you quickly, just to let you know that I'm thinking about you when it comes up. So you have a quick hit of like, that I'm still around, even if I'm not really literally around. And then I find myself also going through life, having experiences going, oh, and I'll look up to share it with you, and I might be away from you for a time, and I'm like, oh, she's not here to share it with you, but I'm still thinking about sharing it with you because it's a powerful experience, and it's something that I love sharing together with you throughout life, and it's a little wiring to some degree that I think happens between people that you want to share the experiences. I remember a woman, her and her husband had she was a thinker woman, and he was a feeler male. And this is before I knew typology. It's like 20 years ago, right? And I remember like he would do a lot of romantic gestures, and she was like, he brings me flowers again. This doesn't mean anything to me. She was like, I wish he would just, I think she was ESTJ. She's like, I wish he'd just do stuff around the house. That would show more love than bringing a bunch of dead flowers home. Like she had a very effectiveness viewpoint, right? From a personality typology standpoint. But she said she trained herself that every time her spouse would walk into a room or she would look over and just happen to see him, she trained herself to have a little bit of a like a breath in, like a little excited breath. And she said, I would just do that. Even if I didn't feel it, I would just go through the mechanics of doing that. And she said, I started to feel it over time. I started to feel like, oh, cool. There's the person I'm in love with is over there. And every time her eyes fell upon them, this is a technique. I don't know if she learned it from a marriage counselor or who. She would train herself to do this. And then she found herself doing it naturally over time. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about too, to some degree. Like you have these little moments where you just remember how much this person means to you. And these little microtransactions, if it's over distance or in the immediate time. And I think that is a sign of health in a relationship.
I remember going to an intimacy intensive a long time ago, and they recommended to stop seeing touching your spouse as giving them a touch, but rather taking touch. As in, when you touch your mate, you're not doing it just for them. You're doing it for yourself too, because it's so rewarding to you to be able to touch them. I thought that was a really interesting reframe. So now when like I rub your back, I don't think of it as I'm doing this for you. I think of it as I'm doing this for me. I'm rubbing your back because I get to touch you. My hand gets to touch your bare skin. And that's so, and in fact, sometimes you go, oh, that feels really good. And it almost ruins it because I'm like, this isn't for you. This is for me. And I'm like, oh, now you made it about you again. It's weird when being selfish is the thing that you got to do in order to remind yourself of your relationship with your spouse. But and now I've gotten to a point where you say, oh, that feels really good. I'm like, okay, it's for him too. But it's more like I want to reach out to you because I want to remind myself. I remind myself how rewarding it is to be able to do that. And I think when you're in a really healthy relationship, it's not like you have to be glued to each other. It's not like you have to constantly be doing like PDA and sitting on each other's lap and constantly like hanging over each other. It's actually more subtle than that. It's just a little reminder that, oh, I get to have this person in my life.
Number 4 on my list is I think healthy relationships have conflict. If I look at a couple and they're not fighting, they're not having conflict, I start to get concerned. I think that's probably not a healthy relationship. Or at best case scenario, it's very surface. There's not much intimacy there. I think with intimacy, because you're starting to get down to the depths of your heart, your mind, your soul, how you're wired, your values, you're getting into value stuff, right? That's going to bring up conflict. You're going to see things a little different. And that conflict is where intimacy is built. And overcoming the conflict together in a healthy way is how intimacy is built. So if you don't have conflict in your relationship, from my opinion, it's probably not very healthy, or it's very shallow, one of the two. If you want a deep connective relationship that has the deepest levels of passion, desire, or romance, you want to feel fully connected to this person, explore yourself and them, and really get intimate, conflict will arise. And I think it's a marker of a healthy relationship. Not necessarily fighting, but conflict.
Yeah, I'm glad you create that distinction because my number 4 is very similar to your number 4. But this idea that it has to be like knock down, drag out fighting, I don't think that's what you're trying to indicate. But like the more intimate I become with myself, like the more I deep dive into who I am as a person, I run into conflict inside because there's all sorts of different parts of me that I may not really understand that element of who I am. And I'm like, oh man, that's not good. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. And there's got to be at least some of that with the person outside of yourself, or like you said, you probably aren't getting very intimate if there's not that conflict arising. My number 4 is that the couple is a team even when they're fighting. So I think fighting is something it can't really, if you've got a truly connected, intimate relationship, I don't think you can really avoid fighting. Like you said, it's probably not super intimate if the couple's never fighting. However, even when you are fighting or experience conflict, it doesn't have to be a big fight, but it can just be conflict and you're trying to navigate through it and it might get a little tense. No matter how big or small the fight or conflict is, there's still a team mentality. Like you're still on each other's team. You're still doing things for each other's benefit. And I'm not trying to indicate like it's necessarily you guys against the world, but there is a little bit of that spirit. It's like if anything comes to try to threaten this relationship or anything that tries to threaten this unit, You're going to fight together against it. And so fighting, I think, is a piece of it. And then I think on top of it is the team mentality, even when you're fighting.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And actually that it goes into my number one, the final one on my list, or number 5, however you're keeping count, is that the relationship itself is a third entity. I think healthy couples, healthy relationships, kind of to your point about the team mentality, is it's not me and another person, 2 of us, and we're connected. It's a me and another person, and the dynamic that we are connected creates a third entity that is outside of ourselves. We are inclusive of that. Like it's a third entity we're a part of. And that third entity, kind of the team concept you're talking about, is really what you're protecting. When you're in that third entity, you're creating almost metaphysically in a way. I mean, this is super woo-woo, right? But you're creating this like energy space between 2 of you. You are greater than the sum of your parts. The 2 of you together in a relationship, if you, in my opinion, if you're healthy, you are more than you could be individually or just individually in kind of a casual, connected way. You're really bonded in a way that creates this third entity that's worth protecting. Like it's, you might fight for your own rights in there, and your person that's with you might fight for their individual rights. And then at the end of the day, it's almost like, but what is the reason why we're even fighting for this? We have this entity that's outside of ourselves. We almost imagine a shell around us that we'll go to bat and fight for as well. Like it's worth preserving, the entity itself. And I'm not talking about just like the marriage contract. You sign a piece of paper or you say some vows. I'm talking about the energy of the relationship. And that's regardless if you're married or not. You have that space you've created that it is more than just the 2 of you. It's the 2 of you together. And that third entity is worth preserving and protecting. And I think that healthy couples show up with a framework of this relationship is worth something. It's worth something beyond just myself, and it's worth something just beyond the other person.
And that goes into my 5, or well, I was counting 1 through 5. Apparently you were going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That we really didn't compare notes, did we?
No. I think this is good stuff, though. We're getting richness out of this.
All right. So my last one, my number 5, or 1, depending upon how you've been counting it, is that the grass isn't greener anywhere else. And I remember you saying a quote from somebody. I don't know who the quote is from, so please correct me if I misquote it. But the saying was that the grass isn't greener on the other side. It's always greener on my side because I nurture it. Do you remember?
Actually, I said that.
Oh, is it? Was that you?
I said the grass isn't greener on the other side. It's greener on my side because I make it green.
Oh, well, then it was you. I thought you were quoting somebody, but apparently...
I don't think I'm quoting anybody. I think I just said that to you one day.
Okay, so to quote Joel Mark Witt, the grass isn't greener on anybody else's side. It's greener on my side because I make it green. And I assumed that meant that you attend to it and nurture it and see it as green and experience it that way. So I think in a healthy relationship, there's no pining for what could have been. There's no sense that I gave up something for this and maybe that would have been a better choice. Like there's always a cost of specialization when you choose somebody to spend your life with, even if it's just a portion of your life. That's still like, that's the one commodity you get as a human being is your time. That's it. That's what you really like. That is our currency, is our time. And when you choose to spend your life with somebody, like all of that time, you've got to choose it wisely. And when you choose that person, you are choosing to specialize in them and whatever relationship emerges. And you chose that. And so there is no what could have been outside of it. There's no pining for something else. Like there's really nothing else that you can think of that would be better than this. This is the relationship. And so there's no sense of the grass is greener someplace else. Like the grass is always greener in this relationship because you make it that way.
Yeah. So I would agree with that. I think there are, somebody right now is you probably might be listening and you might be thinking about things outside your relationship. And I don't think that's necessarily, I wouldn't say it's a marker of an unhealthy relationship. But as you move toward more health, you probably will start to see the grass greener inside the relationship more and more because you're going to realize that, we talked about this in the couple past episodes. It's not like these things happen to us. We grow to make them happen. I think that's the idea of making the grass green on your side. So it's not like a toggle switch. Like, well, I was thinking maybe I should get together with this other person that's not in my relationship with me. Does that mean I'm in a very, very unhealthy relationship? No, it just means that, again, from our subjective viewpoint, at least what you're positing, Antonia, is that, no, but look at the ways you could make this more green here. What can you do to make this relationship the best relationship you've got? And if you find yourself kind of thinking in terms of outside of that, what is that? What's the bellwether? What is happening there? Like, why are you thinking in terms of outside of there? What is it that you're not willing to do here in this relationship?
I think the distinction here is that if you are in a relationship and you're thinking about somebody outside of it, that doesn't mean that you as a human being are necessarily unhealthy. It's actually it's like a normal human thing to do, to have your eye be caught by other people. But if you are desiring something outside your relationship, that might be a marker that the relationship itself needs some work.
I think that's a good distinction.
Yeah, like it might need, like, it's not necessarily that you're a bad person or unhealthy, but the relationship itself might need some tending to. The grass is then greener on the other side in that scenario. And so that means that the patch where you've chosen to stand might need some tending. And if you've decided that that relationship is complete, then that relationship is complete. And you, of course, have permission to move on. We're not talking about necessarily the dynamics of a person's life and how they go through, which relationships they go through, etc. We're just talking about the relationship you're currently in. And for me, from the outside, when I see somebody who isn't pining for something outside of their relationship, I see that as a marker of a healthy relationship.
So we say this to inspire you, hopefully, to make your subjective list, whether it's 5 items or 10 items or 30 items, or even just in your head, just have some ideas on how do you define a healthy relationship. If romantic relationships are interesting to you, if you would like to have a romance in your life, a relationship that you're really happy about and fulfills your needs, and you feel connected to the other person and you want to see it as healthy as possible, how are you defining, or how are you going to measure the success of that? I think a lot of times in life, we go through life, and especially when we're talking about social dynamics, any kind of relationship ideas, or the path we take in life, how we raise our kids, how we show up as lovers or friends, we don't really have a lot of metrics that we put to this, because they're very subjective ways of going through life, right? We have a subjective, I'll know it when I see it. And sometimes we don't really know it until we've experienced it, but oftentimes we put a little thought into what this might look like, or what are the metrics, or how are we going to measure the success of this? Like for your kids, for example, as you're raising your children, how will you know you've been a successful parent? When your children leave the home someday, how will you know you've been a successful mom or dad? How are you going to measure that? And I think that's this term. It's like, how do you measure the health of your relationship? It's going to be subjective to you and the person you get into relationship with. What are the markers that subjectively matter to you? How are you going to frame it and say, I think I'm in a healthy relationship because I've hit some of these markers that I had pre-designed for myself or thought through. And I've looked at other couples and I've used that to triangulate and get a sense of, oh, I think this is a healthy relationship. That over there is probably not because of these things. And you start to get an idea of that. And then this is something that would be amazing to talk about with your lover, spouse, partner, and talk about how you might find that you have very radically different ideas from what a healthy relationship looks like. And I bet you that just the exercises of making a list like Antonia and I did, make a list separate from each other where you each say, hey, just list the 5 or 10 things that you think a healthy relationship looks like. I'll do the same, and then compare notes. That could be an amazing conversation starter between the two of you, especially if you're in conflict right now, especially if you're having a struggle in your relationship. That is amazing conversation starter to go, wow, our values are pretty much in alignment here. We actually kind of see things eye to eye on a healthy relationship. What can we do to build toward more of the things on our lists? Or you might look and go, oh my goodness, you define a healthy relationship as, throwing dishes at each other or whatever crazy. I'm just playing, but they might have a radically different viewpoint of what a healthy relationship looks like. And knowing that information and talking that through can be really a benefit for your experience and your romance together. So what do you think? I would love to see your list. I think your list might be really interesting. Just go over to personalityhacker.com directly below this podcast. Go ahead and just punch out 5 or 10 things of how you would see a healthy relationship. What are the markers of that you would be looking for in your current relationship or a relationship you'd love to have someday? And we could get a discussion started around this and compare notes and see how people are defining this, again, subjectively to them. But it's good to get templates of ideas from other people because it helps us craft what we're looking for in life too. You can do that over at personalityhacker.com, like I mentioned, below this podcast, or you can join our community of like minds over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly giving, you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes. That helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.